everyone, and welcome to the All About Energy podcast produced by Acclaim Energy. My name is Stuart Black. I'm a vice president here at Acclaim, and today I'd like to talk to you about ERCOT's new securitization and market design changes that have increased the energy supply cost in Texas and how these changes will impact our electricity bills. It's almost been a year and a half since Winter Storm Uri, and we are still working through market and reliability issues that have yet to be realized by the consumer, but that's about to change. The PUC and ERCOT have been working diligently to make our grid more reliable in the wake of the freeze, and this has been a multifaceted effort involving regulatory as well as market design changes that have collectively increased our energy supply cost in Texas. So there are two predominant areas where these supply costs are increasing, one being ancillary services, and the other are new securitization charges related to stabilizing the wholesale electricity market. These increased costs are being charged back to the load-serving entity, or the LSE. Just to clarify, load-serving entities are organizations that directly serve the retail electric customers. And if you look at your electricity contract, most will specify that the LSE may pass through to the consumer cost increases as a result of a change in law that impacts their cost to serve the consumer. So what exactly are ancillary services? Well, ancillary services are basically standby generation services or operating reserves used to maintain the reliable operation of the market. They are used to ensure that there is enough reserve capacity or power generation to serve customers through periods of grid emergencies and or peak use periods that require more power to meet the demand. So what ERCOT has done is that they have significantly raised the minimum amount of ancillary service obligations that the LSE, the load-serving entity, must procure in order to maintain reliability and meet the customer demand. It's important mentioning that the market fundamentals in Texas continues to challenge our reliability year over year. We're talking about more people moving to the state, more charging stations for electric vehicles, among other factors, and all of which increases our load demand faster than it has in the years past. At the same time, we are decommissioning coal-fired power plants and some natural gas plants. These are all stable power sources, and replacing with renewable energy like wind and solar, which is intermittent in nature. When the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining during peak periods, this is when ancillary services are most likely to come into play. These reserve generation components are called upon when baseload generation cannot meet the current demand. So if we think about it, the more ERCOT pays the ancillary service providers for these services, the more the load-serving entity will be charged relative to the percentage of the load that they account for on the grid, and the more that will be likely passed on to the consumer. So these ancillary service charges are comprised of four components. The first component is a regulation up, which are costs going to the operators who can increase generation output to the grid when called upon. The second component is a regulation down. These are costs going to operators who can decrease generation output to the grid when needed. The third component is a non-spinning reserve, and these are generators on standby and ready to run within 30 minutes of notification. And the fourth and final component is a responsive reserve, which are dispatchable generation reserves as a backup when the primary generation plants go down. This is something that we experienced as recent as early last May. These are all essential generation assets that are needed to be available and on standby in order to give ERCOT the tools it needs to maintain a balanced grid. So now to the second part of this energy supply cost conversation, the new securitization cost. These securitization charges originated as a way to stabilize or true up the wholesale energy market as a result of high market prices caused by Winter Storm Uri. The PUC issued orders in dockets number 52321, which is default securitization, and 52322, which is uplift securitization. These two dockets collectively allow ERCOT to obtain approximately $3 billion in funds to help stabilize the wholesale electricity market. These funds will be financed through bonds, and the bonds will be serviced through charges to the load-serving entities, who again are allowed to pass these charges on to the customers. Securitization charges are comprised of 1. A default securitization charge, which is a charge that relates to $800 million in ERCOT finance cost associated with bankrupt market participants. These are participants who defaulted on their payment obligations during the extraordinary high market rates of $9,000 per megawatt hour. The second is an Uplift securitization charge. This is a charge that relates to roughly $2.1 billion in ERCOT finance cost associated with a similar cost that the LSEs were charged during Winter Storm Uri for the extraordinarily high market prices. You may recall the maximum allowable market price per megawatt hour, sometimes referred to as the market cap, was $9,000 per megawatt hour. But the PUC has since reduced this to $5,000 per megawatt hour today. If your existing contract includes ancillary services bundled as a part of the energy price, you can expect your provider will pass the difference between the original cost that was built into the price and the increased cost through to the customer. Customers who have ancillary costs that are not included in a fixed pass-through will notice an increase as a line item on your bill. So when can we expect to see these increased costs on our electricity bills? Well, these charges were supposed to show up around the second quarter of 2022, but the bonds weren't fully issued in time. That being said, the bonds were issued and should be showing up on your bill any day now. But this is all dependent on your provider. So if you're asking yourself, how much is this going to cost me? The preliminary estimates, depending on your price, product, and your monthly consumption patterns, the combined charges could increase your total monthly bill by approximately 2 to 3% on average in the calendar year for 2022. But this is an estimate only. As the PUC and ERCOT continue this journey of grid reliability, we as consumers can expect more money to be spent to meet the rapid increase in demand for electricity. As more quick response generation assets are introduced to the grid and additional incentive programs for the market participation are paid out, the debt obligations will ultimately come down to the consumer level for the foreseeable future. I realize this is not the best news, but I want to thank you for joining me today on the All About Energy podcast. I hope you found this content informative. Please feel free to share this podcast with your colleagues. Acclaim Energy specializes in assisting organizations and helping them optimize their energy portfolio, mitigate risk, and capture the best prices. For more information, contact us at 713-524-0250. Thanks again and have a great day.